Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is our latest virtual event for the Notre Dame Family Philanthropy Network. I'm Michelle Joyce from our Foundation Relations Office here at Notre Dame, and as we begin all meetings, let us start with a prayer. In this case, I thought it would be appropriate to say a prayer for families. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We bless your name, O Lord, for sending your own incarnate Son to become part of a family, so that as he lived its life, he would experience its worries and its joys. We ask you, Lord, to protect and watch over this family, so that in the strength of your grace, its members may enjoy prosperity, possess the priceless gift of your peace, and as the church alive in the home, bear witness in this world to your glory. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us. I'd like to share a quick update from campus. Since we last met, the university has been navigating an in-person fall semester in the midst of the pandemic. We're now over halfway through that semester, which will end at Thanksgiving. We've just announced that there will be an extended winter session with the start of the spring semester on February 3rd. Notre Dame is currently working on a variety of experiences, including short-term projects and community-based work for the students during this winter session. In the meantime, we have numerous students, as you can imagine, whose financial circumstances have been affected by COVID-19. And we've created the Student Emergency Relief Fund to support these students specifically. And you can check that out at our updated giving.nd.edu website. Another website addition since the last time we met is the Family Philanthropy Network page that's under our Foundation Relations website. So you can go to foundations.nd.edu and click on the NDFPN banner to find the FPN page where you'll find recordings of our previously held virtual events. So thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your feedback after our summer seminar series. We heard an overwhelming interest in family dynamics. So we're bringing to you today Family Matters, Managing Philanthropy Across Generations. We have a wealth of knowledge and experience among our guests today. They'll be sharing insights into all things family, and you can share your questions anytime via the chat function on Zoom. My colleague, Amanda Ratartha, is here with us today, and she'll be passing those questions along during the Q&A sessions. And she may ask you via chat if you're interested in asking the question yourself. So for those of you who do not have updated Zoom settings, it will be helpful to select speaker view on the top right of your Zoom window, just to help in viewing this event. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed guests, starting with our very own Dr. Michael Genuine. He's clinical professor of law, concurrent associate professor of psychology, and director of the Applied Mediation Clinic here at Notre Dame. With his JD from Loyola University Chicago and his PhD in psychology human development from the University of Chicago, Dr. Genuine has extensive experience in domestic relations, and he's here to share with us his work, particularly in the area of family conflicts, that could be applied to the dynamics in a family foundation. Welcome, Michael. I'll let you take it away, and we can have some Q&A after your presentation.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Let me just see if I can get my slides on here appropriately. All right. Did the screen share work? Wonderful. Thank you. I just want to start by going over some basic information. For starters, I want to talk about organizational conflict as one. And so organizational conflict, I've got a couple definitions here, but this is just something to think about in terms of the conflict in an organization is when there's some state of disagreement, misunderstanding, and it just has to be a perceived difference of opinions. It doesn't even have to really be a difference. And that's what we run into a lot with difficulties with families when we deal with family conflict, is that people perceive there to be differences when they may not actually exist. So the other definition is just when we talk about discord, when goals, interests, or values of different individuals or groups of individuals are incompatible, and those people then start to work counter to each other, and they kind of get in the way of each other's goals or objectives for the organization. Now, one of the big punchlines here is that conflict is inevitable. People will often say, oh, I avoid conflict, I don't want to deal with conflict, whatever they can do to avoid the whole concept of conflict. But conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. So when we think about conflict, again, any organization is going to be growing, evolving, and changing from the presence of conflict. If you think about the jury system that we have in place, the whole idea is conflict, that you bring together 12 individuals who have different viewpoints and different perspectives, and that they resolve that conflict in the confines of the jury room so that they can come up with a verdict for the individual that's based on all the information. So we have to get away from this idea that conflict is a bad thing. When we're talking about families who come together in philanthropy, family foundations, the individuals bring their strengths, their passions, their identities, and they also bring their conflicts. There are conflicts in organizations, there are conflicts in families, and so you kind of get a double dose of that when you're dealing with a family foundation. Problems most frequently arise when the conflicts are kept quiet and people avoid the difficult conversations for decades or generations. That's true in families, it's true in family foundations. One other thing that comes into play is the issue of family dynamics. So family foundations specifically are going to be affected by the patterns of family interactions and change in relationships within the families. So this can be rooted in early relationships. I've worked with families before where there's conflict and it comes down to, well, I remember in 7th grade, he got away with doing such and such or whatever. And this is 30 years later, and the families still have some underpinnings of conflict from something that hasn't been addressed from when people were children. So keep in mind when we're talking about family dynamics, they can be very complex. They can be intergenerational. They can have arrows going in multiple different directions if we look at them graphically. I put up an interesting research finding here just as an example. There's research that shows that when parents help out young adult children differently, if they provide different amounts of money to help the children and young adults, that can predict worse sibling relationships later in life. So this is just an example of a research study that shows that, you know, a parent who thinks they're doing the right thing by helping one of their young adult children in need, down the road, it can cause, again, some of these family dynamic conflicts that you may not anticipate at the time. So this kind of perceived parental favoritism is one example of a family dynamic that can have momentum over time and can last and can impact the relations of the family and the workings of a family foundation. So this can have a big impact on the well-being of the foundation and the functioning of the foundation. I don't think I need to really explain how a family board could see some of these conflicts surfacing, but in addition to the baggage or the past conflicts that may not be resolved, you have to keep in mind that these families have other issues that may bring new conflicts into the fold. So divorce or remarriage or other different things that are happening in the family side of things are also going to seep through to the organizational side as well. Now, I want to give you a quick 30 seconds of psychobabble here, where I want to talk about how we make decisions and how we think about things. And there's this concept of hot versus cold cognition. And the idea here is that our executive functions, like when we're thinking about things, when we're processing information, our brain will operate differently in different contexts. So cold cognition is that deliberate process of being logical and using facts and thinking about things. And this is a slower processing, and it's not a knee-jerk reaction. It's very thoughtful. It's very, it incorporates all the different information. If you think about an organization, this is how you want all of your members to be firing. You want them to be thinking about things logically, and you want them to be balancing all the different aspects of it. You want them to consider all the information and weighing it all before they come to any kind of decisions. The flip side of cold cognition is hot cognition, which is processing information primarily through emotions and experiences and long-term memory. This is a more emotional reaction. This is a more knee-jerk. This is the kind of thing that where emotions can get in the way of thought processing and good logical processing. The research shows that for people who, once they get into this emotional state, the brain connections actually are disconnected from the part of the brain that does more of the logical processing. And so it really causes people to react more emotionally and more less logically. So hot cognition can lead to quick decisions. It can be based on prior events. And the downside is that it can exacerbate conflict because it's not going to lead to a good resolution of the conflict that's going on. So family conflict, if it's emotionally based, which most family conflicts are, can trigger this whole tidal wave of emotion in people and it can cause less effective decision making. So, he's always gotten away with that. She's never made to take responsibility. I'm guessing mom and dad are secretly giving him money to bail him out. All of these kind of things that people have brewing under the surface that they never really bring to light can cause them to react emotionally rather than logically when they're making decisions later down the road. So we want to avoid keeping people in the hot cognition side, and we want people to be more on the cold cognition, logical thinking when they're making decisions about our organizations and our money and our goals. So part of what we want to do here is avoid the negatives from emotion. So conflicts within family foundations are worsened when we pretend that family conflicts don't exist. So the worst thing you can do about a conflict is to sweep it under the rug. I know if I speak about my family specifically, my mother doesn't even want to acknowledge past conflicts. If we say, oh, remember when so-and-so and so-and-so disagreed about this, she'll say, I don't have no idea what you're talking about. And it's a complete avoidance of the conflict. The problem with avoiding conflict entirely is that it never gets resolved. It's always under the surface. And so it's kind of a lose-lose scenario because the individuals who have that conflict, it doesn't even rise to the level of them discussing it. The other problem is assuming that ignored problems are going to fix themselves. So people will often think, well, this is just going to work itself out. That really doesn't happen. If that happened, I would be out of work. I could retire early. But unfortunately, people's conflicts don't resolve themselves. They typically get worse with time. The less they communicate with them, the less they kind of keep them off the table, the more they snowball. Also, this resistance of bringing in a third party. Oftentimes, it makes sense to bring in third parties. I train students in mediation. They're neutral third parties who work in civil cases, either in the domestic relations, divorce context, or in other types of civil cases that are referred by the courts. And having just a third party there who the individuals can talk about what's going on and can hear it and can rephrase it and reframe it helps the parties to hear each other better and move forward to resolve the conflict. So oftentimes families will say, no, we don't want to bring in outsiders. We always do this within the family. That can be a mistake that exacerbates conflict for the family. And then putting off issues that are too difficult to discuss. People want to avoid certain uncomfortable discussions, uncomfortable conversations, and so they put them off. And unfortunately, that's the kind of thing that can cause problems, not just with the family foundation, but families generally. One example of this is end-of-life planning. People don't want to talk to their parents or grandparents about how they want to handle end-of-life decisions about burial and other sorts of things, and so they put it off. And unfortunately, sometimes that makes it worse because they never have those conversations, and the family will then later fight about what the outcome is going to be because they're all trying to guess what grandma or grandpa would have wanted. So again, if you avoid conflict, it's going to undoubtedly escalate. It's going to get worse. It may maintain the status quo. So, from one meeting to the next, you may be able to say, we're just going to ignore this. We're going to brush it under the rug. But eventually, it's going to really limit the growth and the continuity of the organization. This can be worse for a family foundation, again, because you may have the family conflicts as well as the organizational conflicts, and it can end up hurting the management structure. It can create all sorts of problems down the road, including ineffective grants, ongoing miscommunications, misperceptions, and even in some worst case scenarios, it can be the demise of the organization. It can really bring things to a screeching halt. So some of the common conflicts that are seen in family foundations, first of all, and we can talk about these as taboo things that people don't often talk about. If your family foundation addresses these openly, more power to you, that's a good thing. If not, you may want to think about ways to open the channels of communication. So one of the common conflicts is succession, and this is how family foundations talk about the power structure and how it's going to move from generation to generation. The research, I think one study I looked at showed that 63% of family foundations don't have an adequate succession plan in place. And it ends up, if you don't have this planned out well, you can end up with arbitrary appointments, which people will resent and be frustrated. For example, just assuming because we haven't talked about succession that the power is going to move to the next oldest sibling or the next oldest of one gender or another, even if that person doesn't have the skills, abilities, or interests to fill that role, and then other family members are going to become resentful, and it can really cause difficulties. These are good open conversations for the foundation to have to decide how these things are going to be planned in advance. Access to the foundation, even deciding who's going to be on the board, who's going to have what role. People will see all sorts of family ties here where, well, this branch of the family always does this, or we've got generational problems with these members of the family, and so we want to keep them out. Or people will perceive that they're being kept out, or others are being included for the wrong reasons because it's not being talked about. The minority rule concept is the idea that one personality dominates the foundation, may dominate board meetings. They talk about founder syndrome being when it's the individual who started the foundation. The group gives them deference, and that person kind of rules things. And without talking about it and saying, you know what, we really need to include everyone's input, and we need, with all due respect, we absolutely respect the input of this individual member, but we have to hear from others, and we have to give others some say as well. We'll help address that. And then finally, we've talked a little bit about this, but it's the rivalry between siblings and family branches. People are going to feel that there may be disparate treatment. It may exist or it may not exist, but without talking about it, it can cause problems in the foundation. So I'm going to give a couple ideas of ways to avoid some of these pitfalls, and then I think I'm going to open it up to any questions that there may be. So again, individuals and boards need to be sure that they're not avoiding addressing these common conflicts. Even to take a list of the ones that I gave and to bring them to a board meeting, you're not going to deal with them all in one meeting, but just to think about, how are we going to talk about these in the long term, and say, well, our board doesn't have problems with this, but here's one issue that comes up. Let's talk about how it might come into play for us. Setting aside time to talk about individual differences and conflict styles. So I don't know how many organizations use tools like the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, the ROSI, which is the Rahim Organizational Conflict Inventory. Those are both free. They're available online, and individuals can take these and they can decide, first of all, you can decide whether it fits you or not when you get your results, but it also can give you some insight as to how each individual deals with conflict. And I've worked with groups before who, as a group exercise, will take these measures and we'll talk about, well, I guess this is why I avoid this, or I guess this is why I view so-and-so as so threatening because he's got a competitive personality, and it at least opens the floodgates so people can start to talk about some of these individual differences, and it takes away some of the stigma that goes with that. You could also do something like a Myers-Briggs type indicator. You generally need someone to come in and administer this because it's not because it's such a difficult instrument, because it's a controlled psychological measure. But again, it can talk about people's personality styles, the way that they do decision-making, those sorts of things, so that they can appreciate their own style and can also appreciate the styles of other people and how they're different. And then there's a lot of literature out there that links the Myers-Briggs and the Thomas Kilmann and those sorts of things, and you can look at your results and pull them together just to get an idea of how your organization members function, and then look kind of at 30,000 feet at how they're all going to function together when you bring those individuals together. And then the other thing that may resolve some of this conflict for family foundations is to invite input from objective third parties. A lot of times people who are in the family foundation are too close to see some of the problems, and it's worth bringing someone who has absolutely no information, who's kind of a blank slate, in to just observe what's going on and maybe report it back to the foundation, because I think it will give, in many cases, a perspective that wasn't there previously. So I'm going to stop the slide share at this point and see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome.
So we do have one. So you did speak a lot about having a third party person there, but if for some reason a family foundation member doesn't have that luxury and wants to address a conflict with another family member just one-on-one, do you have any tips for how to have a healthy conversation? I imagine there's probably not a formula, but are there some tips that you could provide, or some skill sets that family members can hone so that when they go into that conversation, it ends up being healthy and productive?
Sure. So, I mean, the one thing is, if you're going to do it in the way that you're suggesting, maybe keeping it as a one-on-one so that a person doesn't feel ganged up on. Doing it in an informal setting. Don't bite off too much, because again, if you start this process and then get into 17 different problems you have with this person, it can be overwhelming. It can be more than that person can handle at the time. So really kind of be sure that you're setting limits in advance of kind of what roads you're going to go down, and avoiding your own defensiveness, I think, because a lot of times when you criticize others, it brings it right back to you from that person. That's how they respond. So the other piece would be to anticipate going into this meeting. What's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? Kind of organizing for yourself an agenda of what you want to deal with this person. And then from the empathic perspective, think about, if you were that person, how would you react to that approach? So again, you're really thinking in advance. You may even want to practice it with another family member to see, to make sure that you're not coming across as too conflictual or too difficult, or how is someone else going to perceive the kind of feedback that you're about to give them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So we're unfortunately out of time, but we have your contact information that we can share with our participants if you don't mind. They may follow up after this with questions. But Dr. Genuine, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And so from an interesting outside perspective, we now move closer to the families as we're joined by Elizabeth Newton, Director of Family Engagement at Crown Family Philanthropies. In addition to advising the Crown family on their strategic grant making, Elizabeth's extensive philanthropy experience includes serving as an independent philanthropic advisor to individuals, family offices, and foundations, teaching civic engagement and philanthropy, and founding Allow Good, which uses philanthropy as a means to inspire youth to make a positive impact in their world. So Elizabeth is here to share her experience and her work with us. Welcome to Notre Dame, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm so delighted to be here with you and everyone else today to hear your questions and perspectives and share some insights from mine.
We're so excited to have you. And you and I talked recently about how there are not many people in positions like yours. So would you mind starting by just telling us a little bit about your role at CFP?
Of course. So again, I am the Director of Family Engagement at Crown Family Philanthropies, CFP as we call it. The Crown family is a multi-generational, multi-branched family with 3 active generations right now. And in my role as Director of Family Engagement, I think every day about this synergy between the I giving and the we giving, or the collective giving, that we piece, and the individual grant making that family members do. My work is really overseeing, alongside a small family engagement team, a portfolio of programs, thinking about governance and succession, like Michael spoke about, considering how to support research for family member personal giving. And really, the deepest part of my work is considering how we might continue to engage family members in the family's shared philanthropic goals over time. It's a very multifaceted role.
It really is. So in addition to this work, facilitating the Crown Family's philanthropy, you've also served as a philanthropic advisor to other families and to individuals. So can you share a little about the role that family dynamics plays when working with multiple family members as opposed to an individual or a couple?
It was so interesting to listen to Michael, because it is truly my belief that family dynamics is really this underlying tapestry that needs tending to the most before we even get to the philanthropic conversations. It's that most basic element in the work that we do. There are a few ways that I think about how to address family dynamics at the outset so that we can quickly move into making decisions about how we want to be a part of community impact. So many times when we begin conversations with family members, we remind them of how they are showing up both in self and in role, meaning what is it that they're personally bringing to the table, the perspectives, the learned experience, individual ideas. And so too, what is the role they're bringing? Are they a member of the committee? Are they serving as a 4th generation perspective in the conversation? Are they a board director, right? We wear many roles, and those can be blended with perspectives of self. But I think it's important at least to remind family members to consider that as they're stepping into a meeting. Secondly, we talk a lot about and help family members clarify the purpose for a meeting and really what their objectives are for grant making. So once they've moved through that reset of self and role, what are they trying to achieve in a particular meeting? And finally, I think it's really critical to and something we can easily forget, to give attention to the social side of things, especially in longer day retreats. So it's not solely about the philanthropy. When we pay attention to the social side, we're really feeding the way that family members show up at the giving table later on. Some of the conflicts that Michael was talking about are often discussed at our family council table. That sits within the family office, more broadly speaking. But again, having a forum for those discussions is very critical. I was nodding my head in agreement with Michael as he was speaking on that. So again, just to reiterate, how our family members really having conversations about how they want to learn together, how they want to be together, and how they want to contribute to the world together. And for the Crown family, they think of this as tikkun olam, how they will repair the world together.
I love that framework. So many of our NDFPN participants have inquired about onboarding the next gen of family members into their family foundations. So do you support such efforts at CFP? And if so, can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I was brought into this work actually about 6 years ago, originally as a consultant to the family, and still running Allow Good, which you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. And when I was brought in as a consultant, there was a framework that I used as I began to kind of come and set the table with the fourth generation. At the time, that meant working alongside family members who were between the ages of 21 and 35. They've since aged, but that was really the way that I was brought in. And this framework that I used was to consider three things. Making the opportunity intentional. So being clear that it wasn't about necessarily a kids table, that over time, it was about bringing the fourth generation to the committee table where third generation and second generation family members were also participating. So that their voice could be intergenerationally woven in to the families. Secondly, to consider the ways that we would create an innovative grant-making platform for the fourth generation. They didn't necessarily want business as usual. So what best practices in philanthropy were we going to use to help set them up for learning about philanthropy, for doing the experiential work of practicing grant making together, and how are we going to do that in ways that stretched them as philanthropists? And then finally, we wanted to create an inviting space. So again, it's back to this, how are we fueling the social side of things? Because it really does help to elevate the family dynamic at the end of the day. I think I'll share a little bit more about what that looked like, just to give people examples of what we created. So on the collective side for the fourth generation, we did start a fourth generation fund. Now, as much as I said we want the generations to be working together, it was important that we start with the fourth generation, help establish some norms and way of being together. And so it was through this fund that they could pick an issue that mattered to them, come together and clarify the specific area within that issue that they wanted to learn more about, connect with organizations and experts in the field to do that learning, and ultimately distribute funds at the end of the day. So this model has been in place for 5 years now, and the great thing is that we're now seeing family members moving from the fourth generation table to the committee table, which is again the majority place where the family exercises their grant making. We did things for the personal side too. So many fourth generation family members also were allocated directed giving dollars that they could personally contribute or direct to organizations that mattered to them. And we also developed various modules or learning resources to give them either group or individual knowledge, skill building, training to ensure that they were ready and engaged to step into this role again as a philanthropist. This includes a basic philanthropy module that talks about the family's history of giving, as well as the field as a whole. We also developed a directed giving orientation to give family members a sense of giving anonymously versus in name, giving many small gifts versus a few large multi-year gifts, just to orient them about the space. And then finally, our committee work, again, 25 and up, family members can serve on those committees. We have recently developed a more robust onboarding manual, tools, and conversations to really prepare them to broaden their perspectives and wrap their heads around the strategy that's happening around each of the committee giving tables as well. So those are just a few of the insights I have for you about how we've onboarded the next generation.
That's great. I'm taking notes. I'm sure everybody else is. So some of our friends on this call have multi-branched and multi-generational families. Do you have any advice on how they can best navigate the numerous and often complex communications that are needed to make sure that the family members are honoring the family's legacy and that they're rowing in the same direction, so to speak?
As I shared with you, we've really woven legacy into the mission of our work, including this Jewish value of tikkun olam, again, repair the world. The legacy is reflected very clearly in our bylaws and how the family has committed to certain aspects of giving for perpetuity. And a very clear example of giving in such a way is the establishment of the family-led legacy fund, which holds certain giving intentions for perpetuity. So while the committee giving may shift slightly over time, depending on the education committee's strategy, this legacy fund is meant to be that vehicle that provides perpetual giving to certain issues that have mattered to the second generation and generations prior. And as I mentioned before, we navigate some of these more complex communications that are happening in forums such as the Family Council, which happens through our Family Services Department, through subgroup meetings, which are meetings of our family-led committee chairs who come together to the table to really understand not just what's happening at the board director table, but so too what's happening at the committee table, sharing best practices and ideas. Traditionally, many families gather at an annual meeting. We do that as well. The most unique way that we are gathering now with the family is digitally. We've developed a customized digital application for the family. It is way too basic to call Facebook, more robust than that, but essentially a forum for family members to share personal news, share professional news, and for us to share our philanthropic happenings, our social impact really directly and via this little device so easily, family member to family member.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So the majority of our family foundations that we work with are looking to give in perpetuity, right? So when that's the case, succession planning, as Michael described it, becomes a critical component to the family foundation's operations, or should be. So can you speak to some considerations that family foundations should take when they're planning the continuation of their mission?
Mm-hmm. So this legacy piece that we just spoke about is so critical, that there needs to be honor and respect and a desire to uplift that legacy. That goes hand in hand with really respecting where any community or society is at in a given moment. For example, the family today is paying a great deal of attention to how they can better educate themselves on racial equity and implicit bias. And it's important to really be able, again, to carry those hand in hand and say, we can do those things together. Our values as a family want us to show up together in that way. And then in order to do that, this old and the new together, it's really just being clear about what are the rules of engagement. Are all family lines represented or just some? Are the seats around the giving table limited or open to all? Once you have those kind of rules of engagement in place, it's much easier to be clear on your messaging about the decisions for both respecting and honoring the legacy, and so too living in ways that we're demanded to live now because it's right to do and it's right for what society is asking us to do as human beings together in this moment. So really just having that clarity, I think, is so critical in clarity around mission, and to be repeating it over time. It's interesting. It's as if you attend a class and it's your first time learning about philanthropy, for example, right? If you've never been through a class in philanthropy, you say a word like perpetuity and someone may not understand what that word means. The same is true for family members as you're bringing them into the legacy of the work. You have to say your mission a few times over for them to buy into it, to surround themselves in the language, and for them to then be able to find their own voice at the table. And it will happen over time. family philanthropy is so unique because it's exercising social impact while exercising the muscle of being, you know, a meaningful family member in conversation and showing up respectfully in that same place. So it's fun and challenging work to do.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I love that idea of, you know, it being steeped in legacy, tradition, mission, but also dynamic to handle today's, you know, the current times and today's issues. So we have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
So there's a lot of interest in this fact that you have seemed to build out quite a structure there and a framework to really guide the family members through like strategic grant making. And so you have these orientation materials or training materials. One of our participants is wondering if you are open to sharing samples of those training materials, or if you could point to a direction of another person asked if there's a playbook or, you know, a summary of these training materials and also the processes that you were describing earlier.
Sure. So first of all, I'm happy to connect with any of you one-on-one to have a conversation more and to share template materials with you, certainly. Specifically for the next generation, if you're interested in thinking about how to develop a custom curriculum to bring them into the fold, there are excellent resources that exist on NCFP's website, the National Center for Family Philanthropy. And tools provided by an organization called 21, that's just 21-64, referencing the age 21 when family members on board and 64 when oftentimes family members off board from their shared families' philanthropic work. So too, again, back to the next generation, I would encourage you to check out Allow Good's website. So allowgood.org is the organization that I previously founded and ran. We're no longer operational, but all of our curriculum is open to the public and easily downloadable. And you're welcome to access that and use it piecemeal as you wish. But I am more than happy to connect with you to share tools, tips, and resources, documents that we have found to be useful to us, or framing mechanisms that can be supportive.
That's fantastic, thank you. And another question we have, Elizabeth, is could you share what specific committees there are at CFP?
We are called Crown Family Philanthropies because we are an umbrella organization that has multiple different giving vehicles. The majority of our giving is done through one major fund, and that fund supports 5 committee grant-making areas. So I am not talking exhaustively about the other funds, but again, specifically about this major fund. Our giving areas include education, health and human services, environment, Jewish and Israel giving, and global health. And the global health work initially came out of our health and human services portfolio. Family members were very intrigued to understand more about health in the global space, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. And that work focuses on creating universal healthcare offerings in a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa today.
Fantastic. And then we'll have a final question or two here.
Sure.
They're rolling in, Elizabeth. So I think people will be following up with you after this. So how do you connect the official foundation work with the various families who are raising the next generation? For example, there may be some families that have different parenting approaches or faith approaches that may not align as consistently as others do.
We're just beginning to navigate this. I'm so glad you asked. So the 4th generation ranges from age 6 to 40. It has about 3 generations within that one generation, so it's complicated. The 4th generation family members are now having younger kids too, and so we're beginning to think about what kinds of resources to offer these family members. It wasn't traditionally the case that we, the office, supported family members with younger children, but we've started to curate boxes of learning materials, books, websites, resource lists and then shared those with family members via mail. This has been especially wonderful during the pandemic because a box arrives at their door and it gives the family something to do. And we try not to prescribe too specifically, especially when it comes to a specific kind of dogmatic approach within philanthropy. We try to be open generally to social impact. Now, this family is also by legacy a Jewish family. And so giving family members the opportunity to understand that Jewish value is important, but there are family members who are also not Jewish. So it just depends, and the family can receive and choose to then utilize the materials as they wish. And we think of our Jewish giving really from a values base, and these values are accessible to most family members, I would say. So it's a wonderful place to operate and a place to prepare parents of younger family members to now consider how they want to bring their family into the fold. We leave that to the parents.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I really appreciate your sharing these concrete steps and tips for everybody. And it's just such a thoughtful approach to family foundations. And we're so appreciative that you were able to share this with us today. Thank you.
I'm happy to have done it, Michelle. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
So now we have a guest who is here to share an insider's view from the perspective of family member. We have with us today Sarah Roundhorst, all the way from Cyprus. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is a Notre Dame class of 2008. She's current chair of the board at Better Way Foundation, and Sarah serves as the co-founder and director of operations at Launch Network, a nonprofit partnering with public schools to foster whole family and child development. Welcome back to Notre Dame, Sarah.
Thanks. It's good to be back in this community.
So if you wouldn't mind starting to talk to us about the Roundhorst family's approach to philanthropy. So we have a multi-branch, multifaceted family here. What's the driving ethos behind the approach, and how were you connected with it at an early age?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that is really important in all of our philanthropy, and it's something that is, really etched into my heart because I heard it spoken and I saw it lived a lot, is to whom much is given, much is expected. And I would say with that obviously it's a Bible verse, but also like with that philosophy and mindset is how my grandfather, I'm a third generation, and we're currently, it's second and third generation that are mostly involved in philanthropy, but it's with that mindset that my grandfather started our family of foundations is kind of what we call it. We have 5 different foundations, and that's really the base of it. And then I think also similar to what Elizabeth was talking about with Crown Family Foundations is the legacy piece. It's really important. It was really important to my grandfather as the founder, and it was his intent with all of these foundations to really have impact into perpetuity and really have this opportunity for family to be involved in making the world a better place forever, and also have the opportunity for family to come together around something like philanthropy forever. So those are kind of the two, I would say, grounding ethos and mindsets for our work. I think I was exposed to it in multiple ways. So while I did grow up going to a Catholic grade school and high school, those encouraged me to, through those schools, I was encouraged to volunteer, obviously, but it was really instilled in me through seeing my parents work in philanthropy, and we even work outside of philanthropy. They're time for nonprofits, and also with my siblings, and there was a conversation about it. There was talk about it. It wasn't something that seemed really inaccessible. It was, this is what we're doing. We went to this site visit to learn about this organization, or it's important to give back, so I'm volunteering at this organization. And it was really also about an opportunity to serve versus saving. That was something that I saw a lot through my family. And then specifically, like with the formal philanthropy work, I similar to as Elizabeth was explaining, we actually have a foundation called Ankle, which is kind of like a junior foundation for members who are growing up, and you can join when you're 18. And it's mostly my cousins currently that are 18 through upper 20s. And it's a way to learn about philanthropy by getting your hands in the work, the experiential learning, as we say in education. But and actually similar to what Elizabeth was saying, is directors of Ankle, the name of the foundation, they and myself, we could bring organizations to the foundation that we wanted to fund. And then we would talk about it and kind of share our connection to it. So it was actually a really intimate way to get involved with philanthropy. And then as a board, a lot of times when we had in-person, at our annual in-person meeting, we would actually do a service project at one of the foundations that we gave to, at one of the organizations that we gave to really deepen that commitment. And I think that is also kind of like a piece of our philanthropy, is really understanding each other and having a deep relationship and commitment to the people with whom you're serving. So that's kind of how I got formally involved. But then we also did start doing what we call Ankle Connects, where also similar to what Elizabeth was saying, kids who aren't yet old enough to join the Ankle board can either volunteer time, and then that time counts towards a certain amount that the foundation will give to their organization, or they can raise money and the foundation will match that amount that younger cousin raised and donate it to their organization, effectively doubling their impact. So we started that when I was actually on the board. So that wasn't my first introduction to philanthropy, but it's something that we're trying to help create a more formal introduction to kids when they're younger.
That's great, thank you. So now that you're the board chair for Better Way Foundation, what has that experience been like, and what preparation or skills have best served you in that role?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, this was actually, this is a great question, because I'm wrapping up 2 years as board chair at the end of this year, and it's kind of helping me think about, what this experience, and it's definitely been a challenging and I would say inspiring experience as well. I think being on Ankle was really helpful just to understand kind of our family's approach to philanthropy. The motto that to whom much is given, much is expected, and really see how that plays out. And then the importance of building relationships with our partners. And then I also think, so it helped with the mindsets, but it also helped with, some of like the basic procedures of this is what it's like to call in for a board meeting, or this was what it's like to sit in person for a board meeting. I think that helped me prepare to just be a board, or be a director on the board. But then it also helped me as chair to, understand what some of my other family members might be thinking about as they're joining the board. Because as you're younger and you haven't done it before, it can be intimidating. And I think that perspective, that, like training perspective, really helped. I also think outside of the formal philanthropy training in our junior Ankle board, I think a lot of my professional experience was actually quite transferable to the board chair role. So I work in the nonprofit world, and really understanding the perspective of nonprofits and partners who do grant writing and raise money and are doing the work, I think was actually really important to understand how a foundation can be a better partner for nonprofits and how a board can better support a foundation for nonprofits. And then I would also say, I think the experience of like talking about it with my family. I've had, parents, aunts and uncles, siblings been board chairs, and I was able, as I was going into it, and then as board chair, I've been able to talk to them about challenges, or, ask them for their advice and help me prioritize my role. Because at the end of the day, this is a volunteer role. And my professional job was quite demanding. And so you can't do it all. And you don't want it to be this insanely stressful experience, but you want to do it well. And I think family support has been really helpful for me as board chair going into it, and then as board chair to be successful and help me really prioritize and best understand how to be a board chair of a family foundation.
So there's a lot of conversation about millennials and Gen Z wanting to take a different approach to philanthropy from their parents, even if they still adopt their philanthropic values. So you mentioned before, you're a Gen 3 at the head of a multi-generational board. So do you see this divide or change happening?
Yeah, so I would definitely say I've seen a change, but I haven't seen a divide. And I think, you can go either way. But I think our approach, so our foundation, I would say, has changed from trying to be kind of like a top-down organization where it's like, we are giving this money to grantees and here's all the reports that we need back, to really being a more collaborative partner and having a more participatory model in our grant making. And so, for example, we call the nonprofits which we fund are partners instead of grantees. And we're trying to, instead of doing some more traditional evaluation methods, doing some more developmental evaluation methods, especially we fund early childhood development in a couple different parts, but one of them is within Indigenous communities in the US. And so really trying to create a more culturally responsive evaluation process with experts that are not us to understand how they define impact. And then we've also been starting doing some impact investing. And so we've changed from kind of like, I guess the traditional top down to more collaborative and I guess more collaborative process, I'll say. And I think what kept us all together in that process versus dividing us up is that it has happened slowly over time. And we've built buy-in from all people because we've made these decisions based on what we've heard from our partners and what we've learned in our past grant making, and also what we're hearing from kind of other experts in the field. And we've educated ourselves about what other experts are saying beyond just, oh, this is what they said, let's do it. No, let's understand it and understand why experts are saying this or why our partners are saying it, so that we can actually internalize it and get on board with it and have the buy-in, and not just make changes that are the new shiny thing and new people are excited about. And so I think that while we want to move fast because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, it was important for us to make sure everybody was on board and have the buy-in. We also kind of, as we started doing some of that, we updated our mission, vision, and values. And it wasn't a giant shift. It was more around, this was about 5 years ago, creating, investing or supporting holistic and systemic changes within early childhood development. And that was all based on what we had learned and what we learned from experts and especially our partners. And I think incorporating it into our vision and mission and values, which we now talk about, similar to what Elizabeth was saying, we talk about a lot and we make vocal and present, was really important in building that buy-in and sustaining that buy-in, I would say. And I think the last thing is we've really tried to emphasize listening to members of all generations and asking questions that are hard questions, asking questions that are hard and being willing to listen when people are sharing.
So you mentioned you changed your mission, vision, and values. Is that something that boards prior to your current board had done? Or is this something that was really new and you had to address that with older generations?
It was, I believe there had been an update to them previously. I think what we did was, and I wouldn't say change, I would say we updated them to make them more specific and kind of and support that collaborative work. And it wasn't the first time, so I think that also made it easier. But we also, and at the same time, it was really important for us to stay, and we said it, like, it's really important for us to stay deeply connected and aligned to the founder's intent. One of, similar to also what Elizabeth was saying around the faith piece is my grandfather was Catholic, and most of everyone in our family is Catholic. And that was a really important part of our mission. And it's still in there. It's also, though, it's about the values of that faith. And we support organizations that align to Catholic values. And I think that values can be really widespread and aren't as tight around a specific faith. And I think there's a lot of people who can align to the values that aren't necessarily baptized Catholic. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does, Sarah.
Went off into a different direction.
No, it does. And I like that description of the participatory model. It sounds like it's a lot more fulfilling than just grant making, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we heard today a lot about sort of the biggest challenges associated with family philanthropy. But for you, what are some of the biggest rewards?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, there's a lot. First, I think it's an incredible opportunity to engage in conversations with your family members about the incredible work that you're learning about and that's happening in the world. Like when you are at, like at your cousin's wedding, and it's like, oh, did you hear about what this group was doing? And I think that's an incredible opportunity to build a relationship with family members that way. I also think, individually, or for me personally, it's a great way to learn additional skills outside of my professional world. And then that can also transfer to the professional world, because I think it goes both ways. And I also think it's an incredible way to learn about the amazing work that's happening in the world, and to broaden your world perspective. And, I personally value being a lifelong learner, and I think it's a great way to learn about incredible work, to get involved in other organizations after your board service is done. And just learn more and learn about others who you don't know about, and yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So I don't think we have time for any questions here. It looks like our time is coming to a close because we want to go to breakout rooms, but thank you for sharing today. Thank you for zooming in all the way from Cyprus. Thank you for being with us, and obviously you're welcome back to campus anytime, and hopefully one day that will be in person.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Sarah. So now we want to open up the event to conversations among you, the participants. We've heard that you greatly value that dialogue when we come together in these Family Philanthropy Network events. So we'll break out into breakout rooms. You'll be sent to a breakout room, and you could share your own experiences and questions on the topics that were just addressed: family communication, onboarding, succession planning. There'll be a Foundation Relations staff member in each breakout room to start the conversation. Please note that these breakout rooms will not be recorded for dissemination. So we'll bring you back to the main group in 15 minutes, and you can share your own thoughts and experiences. If you need a starting prompt, we invite you to share what skill or resource you heard about today that you feel can address one of your biggest challenges in managing your own family philanthropy. Or you could just start in talking about your own experiences. So we will break out now and then rejoin the group in 15 minutes. All right, I think we're all back. Thank you so much. Our conversation got cut short, but thank you to those in my breakout session. It was a good conversation. I hope yours was a robust dialogue as well. So I would like to thank Michael Genuine, Elizabeth Newton, and Sarah Rauenhorst again today for being our featured guests, and to all of you for spending the last hour or so with us. As always, we appreciate your feedback as we look ahead to future Notre Dame Family Philanthropy Network events. So please do share that with us. We look forward to those virtual events and one day in-person gatherings. So in the meantime, God bless, stay well, and go Irish.